Hello, I'm an old fart, and I have a guilty pleasure, which is I like knives. I'm not an expert or an official representative of anything or anybody in any way, blah, 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 blah. I just like knives. For the last year, you've been joining me now and then on a tour through my collection of small folding pocket knives, and we're going to continue that today with a look at this knife. This is a Pena X Series Dogleg Jack. And we'll get into what all those words and terms mean in a second. But where did this come from? Well, I've always admired Pena knives. I think they're very beautiful, and they're very much the style of knife that I'm interested in, but they're mainly full customs, and I've never been able to get one. Arguably can't afford it. But then Pena introduced the X Series. The X Series are mass-produced, well-made, but production-produced knives made in China to his design, and these have the advantage of being obtainable. Now, I've already had one of his X Series knives, this one. This is the X Series Barlow, and despite having an initial problem cutting myself on it while I learned how to use it, I really liked it. I thought it was beautiful. And so when the Dogleg Jack became available through the distributor that I use, I was very interested. It has an unusual shape, an unusual blade shape, an unusual body shape that seemed to me that it would evoke a kind of a nostalgic feeling because it looks, classic. It looks like Grandpa's jackknife. And with the name Jack in its name, I think that was deliberate. So I had an opportunity to obtain one, and here it is. So formally, this is Pena X Series, which means they're production version knives, Dogleg Jack, and there are a variety of handle materials available. This is canvas micarta. The mechanism, as you can see from me demonstrating here, is a front flipper. Now, ideally, I should flip it sort of horizontally so that you can see the action. I'm going to do that once. There you are. But that's very awkward. You really want to flip this knife this way so that the blade is traveling vertically. And that way you're in no danger of dropping it as all the geometry changes. So as I open and close it, it's going to be this way. You've had your one look. So anyway, front flipper. It's a bolster-lock, which means it's a liner lock, frame lock, but with the lock bar largely covered by the micarta scales. So think frame lock. Now, something very important about the mechanism, unlike the clip point Barlow, this has no nail nick. The clip point Barlow has a nail nick, so you can open it two-handed like this. This one has no nail nick. I don't know why. He could easily have done it, but he didn't. So it can only be opened with the flip mechanism. So you really need to practice the technique. It works well, and it works reliably. It really pops open when you get the pressure and angle right. And it's safe after learning how. The most important thing is to get the thumb placement right. And the thumb, for me, the thumb to flip does not start here on the back of the blade. It starts here on the end of the blade. There is jimping there. Put the thumb on the end of the blade high up and do some rolling pressure, like rolling a Zippo lighter, and it pops open quite naturally. So anyway, it took me a while to learn to do that reliably and safely. The size, well, it's 168 millimeters total length when open. What does that mean? Well, it's a little less than a pocket calculator, but 0.91 pocket calculators. So on the small end, actually, of mid-size knives. To compare, the original Pena that I liked, the X Series Barlow, well, the Dogleg is shorter overall, but has a slightly longer blade. So a little less handle, a little more blade. Interesting. To compare it to the Mini Griptilian, one of my standard, the Dogleg is very slightly, this might make it easier to see, the Dogleg is very slightly smaller, like a millimeter smaller, literally a millimeter smaller. And to compare it to another kind of classic looking slip joint, it's exactly the same size as the Benchmade proper. So it's very much in the sort of small end mid-sized range. For the weight, it's 67 grams, which is 1 less than the Barlow, so call it the same, and a few grams more than the proper, which with its carbon fiber body, that's not surprising. So call it, mid-range, mid-size, mid-weight. It's a nice average size knife. The blade is exactly 3 inches long, which I always say this, I don't know whether that's in or out of the so-called 3-inch limit areas. Since so many hit 3 exactly, I assume that's in, but I'm not a lawyer. Check with one. Blade is M390 steel, which is kind of actually says so, look at that. Well, blade's M390 steel, which is a premium steel that I really like. Not too difficult to sharpen, takes a really nice mirror polish and stays sharp a long time. The blade shape is interesting. They call it a spear point, which is, I guess, technically true. I mean, they'd know, right? But it's certainly not a pure spear point. Spear point tends to imply that the sides of the curve are symmetric. This isn't. And it has a very slight recurve in here. So it's a modified spear point. I don't know, the look to me is that it's very attractive. It looks old, is that the right word? It looks, I don't know, classic. It looks nostalgic. Has a very small choil, enough for sharpening, so you're able to sharpen this without threatening the shoulder, but certainly not anything like big enough for finger choking, so strictly a sharpening choil. A beautiful blade. The Micarta, the body is Micarta on this version, Micarta on titanium, and it has a double curve, so it starts out going this way, curves that way, curves back, and I think that's where the name Dogleg comes from. And again, the interesting curved body combined with the slightly recurved blade. See the kind of S shape there? It just gives it a relaxed, comfortable, nostalgic appearance, in my opinion. Like it a lot. The clip is milled titanium. It is shallow carry and it is not movable. There's no mounting on this side. So very much a one-sided knife. So for left-hand people, ambidextrous opening, sure. There's nothing about that flipper mechanism that is different on left and right hand. So you can certainly open it with your left hand. I'm not even going to try. I'll definitely hurt myself. But the clip, no, right hand only. And the closing mechanism being a frame lock, no, right hand only. So sorry, not really a left-handed knife, although I'm sure my left-handed friends can learn to use it. Manufacture is in China. As I said, this is how the X series become available. I believe the manufacturer is Riet in China. All I can say is it is definitely high-end work. The fit and finish is really good. I like a lot about this knife. I've mentioned already, I really like the appearance. I like the kind of nostalgic feel. It really evokes memories. I often say Dad's jackknife, not this one. This one actually evokes memories of Grandpa's jackknife. Now, I barely knew my grandpa. I don't even know if he had a jackknife, little less what it would have looked like. So I don't know why it would give me that effect, but it just really does, Old classic knife that somebody quite a long time ago would have had. So I like that a lot. I like the beautiful lines of the body, whether it's open or closed. Like the blade, the M390 is probably my favorite steel. It's a useful shape and size. Really nice sort of large belly here for starting cuts without having to pierce. Jimping on the back, just a beautiful blade. It is comfortable to cut with. It's a good size, a simple shape. This kind of double curve here acts as finger grooves without the ugliness of finger grooves. That's kind of neat. And there's pleasant jimping for the thumb. So with the Micarta, which is a great surface for gripping, very comfortable to hold for cutting with. Another thing I like a lot, I think I mentioned this on the X series clip point, the screws that hold it all together, sort of here, and here, these are big Torex screws. These are T9s. Not just the pivot, but even the scale screws, they're all T9s. which means that they're less likely to strip than those horrid T6s that are in such common use. But also, I think they actually look quite nice. They're big enough that the thorax hole ends up looking decorative. You've got this nice kind of star shape there. So I think that's quite neat. I don't know if that's intended, that they did it for appearance as well as function, but I think it really adds to the appearance. And I like the mechanism. Opening it is a pleasant experience when it works, but it took a little while to learn how to do it. And speaking of the mechanism, closing it, it's not obvious looking at it from the side. If you look at it from the end, there are actually subtle recesses milled into the two sides there, here and here, to make it easier to get your thumb in there. So the thumb release is a little easier than it is on some knives where there is no such relief cutaway and you really have to work to wedge your thumb in. On this one, that's been thought of and built into the design, and it's quite easy to get your thumb in there to release the blade. So all things I like. It's not a perfect knife. There's a few things that I don't like. The first I've kind of mentioned already is that it was hard to learn to open it. Okay. Now, obviously, I can open it. It's not hard now, but it was hard to learn. And I think there's a couple of reasons. First of all, I started out afraid of it. And I was afraid of it because I'd had some problems with opening the X series that resulted in cutting myself a couple of times. And it was this knife where I actually forced myself to learn how to do it. Because with the X series, because I became afraid of it, I reverted to the nail nick, and I just was treating it as a two-handed knife for quite a while. I didn't flip it at all. Since this one doesn't have the nail nick, you can't do that. So that's a disadvantage, but it's also an advantage in that it forced me to learn to open it. Very satisfying when it works. It just took a while to learn. Now, if this was my only knife, or if I had fewer knives so that I was operating it all the time, it would become extremely natural and no problem at all. As it is for me, carrying it less frequently, because I have quite a few knives that I rotate through, I have to stop and think, okay, set myself up, get my thumb in the right position, open, and it just works beautifully. The reason it's in my don't like side is, first of all, it was a learning curve, but more important, this is not a knife I would loan to somebody. There isn't any other way to open it. I can't loan this to somebody and tell them to use the nail nick. Thumb studs are not that difficult. The only way to open this is as a front flip, and a non-knife person would almost certainly hurt themselves. If I ever had to loan this knife to somebody, what I would tell them to do is open it two-handed. Hold it firmly in your left hand, flip it with your right. Now that looks and feels dumb, but that's what I would do if I was loaning it to somebody else. Or better still, I would open it and sort of, hand it to the person in question. So, other standard complaint with frame lock knives is closing. Move the lock bar with my thumb, start closing. My thumb is in harm's way. The first contact that's going to happen is live blade against my thumb. So there's a good opportunity to cut yourself there if you're not paying attention. And final standard complaint with bolster locks is that when it's open, there's a gap there, which is going to fill up with sand, earwigs, pocket lint, whatever is blowing in the air at the time. So I would imagine that every now and then, not that often, but every now and then, I'm going to want to take this scale off and clean out under the bolster there. Small complaints for what is really a beautiful knife. So let's go through my rating system and talk about how beautiful I think it is. We'll start with the NTGK rating for non-threatening gentleman's knife. And we'll start with non-threatening. So for non-threatening, so the good news is the appearance. That is a nostalgic looking knife. Somebody's going to look at that and think of grandpa, not think weapon. Soft, smooth lines, a subtle S shape, so no barbs, zombie barbs or whatever on it. Functional, nostalgic blade shape. I think all of that sort of softens the appearance of the fact that it's a knife. It makes it less threatening, and that's good. The bad, of course, is that you can't open it slowly. The only way to open this knife is with a flip that is fast and looks like a switchblade. And I don't think there's any way to talk somebody down from that. There really isn't any way to open it two-handed except this silly awkward thing, which is fumbling. So I think the fast open with no option works against it as non-threatening. So I'd give it a B as non-threatening. As a gentleman's knife, I think it's pretty good. The good is it is classy looking, premium materials, titanium, micarta, M390. The writing is understated, and I like that in a knife. On one side we have Pena, on the other side we have M390, and that's it. And the writing is small and subtle and fairly low contrast, so it doesn't shout out at you like advertising. And it is, of course, a boutique brand. You know, I don't need to tell people that are admiring it that this particular model is designed to be obtainable. Instead, I tell them about Pena being custom knives and how hard they are to get. So there's the boutique brand cachet that comes with that. The bad as a gentleman's knife is, again, you know, the somewhat awkward fumbling for opening it is, you know, not as gentlemanly as you'd like. And the shallow carry means that there's quite a bit sticking out of your pocket, and it's the fat end of the body that's sticking out of your pocket. So it's certainly not unobtrusive in the pocket. I'd give it an A as a gentleman's knife, and so all told, B for non-threatening, A for gentleman's. I'm going to give it a B+ as a non-threatening gentleman's knife. And you know, if it had a nail nick so that it could be opened slowly and two-handed, I think it would be an A+. It's just, I'm really sorry they didn't do that. And you know, clearly they can, and they know how. So I'm sorry they didn't do it here. That would have made a huge difference as an NTGK. As it is, I really like it. I like it a lot. It's just not quite perfect. But then, you know, maybe nothing is. How about the KN rating, which is what my knife nerd friends will think? Well, the pros are premium materials, mechanically great, you know, wonderful feeling action, secure lock with a nice thunk, high tolerances. It's beautifully made. There's no noticeable lip here between the micarta and the titanium. Blade is perfectly centered. Blade was nice and sharp out of the box and nice and symmetrically ground. Classy micarta. Just, you know, lots of good things. The only con, really, is a knife nerd thing, is that it is hard to learn to open. Now, if I was handing it to a knife nerd friend who was intimately familiar with front flippers, I'd have no problem at all. A knife nerd friend for whom this was their first front flipper, I would tell them to be careful and maybe even suggest they open it two-handed for their first experience, just until they get used to the feel. So again, great knife, not quite perfect. As a knife nerd knife, I'm going to give it a KN rating of A-. And finally, the CMR, the cut myself rating. Well, my rating is normally fairly simple. Never cut myself on this knife means A, but I'm going to give it an A- because I'm going to say I haven't cut myself yet. With that powerful flipper mechanism, no other way to open it, in particular no nail nick, I think it's likely that I'm eventually going to cut myself on this knife. So I'm going to give it an A- as a CMR. And that brings us to the end. In summary here, this is a beautiful knife. It's high-end materials, it's well-made, fantastic tolerances, a great nostalgic looking design and feeling, and a great user. So if it had a nail nick, I would call it perfect, and as it is, it's less than perfect, but still among my favorite sort of everyday gentleman's knives. Thanks for watching. See you again.